I'm Olivia, and this is White Rabbit Journeys. And I thought it might be helpful to just talk a little bit about my first session and what I felt beforehand and during and after, just so that you can kind of, get an idea of maybe someone having been in a similar situation. So I booked my first session. I booked my first QHHT session after I had a bunch of issues all hit me at the same time. And I just really was looking for answers and help and a bit of guidance in that multitude of situations that was all happening kind of at the same time or within the same space of about 6 to 8 months. So I was in a quite vulnerable space, and I was very nervous, a little bit afraid of what I was going to see, because often when we hear people talk about these journeys or past life regressions, it can sound quite dramatic and cinematic, and we imagine this movie-like experience. It is actually quite a lot more subtle than that, but obviously it is a contributing factor to why we might feel a bit apprehensive beforehand. And so I was very nervous. In the pre-talk part, talking about everything that was going on in my life, I was like, I already cried. So the doors were open for vulnerability and healing and emotional letting go. And at the beginning, I definitely had trouble trusting my imagination and trusting the images that were coming up, and I really needed a bit of time to get the answers out and let them, flow out of me and to describe what I was experiencing. In my case, it was kind of like a combination of pictures, emotions, and then just kind of general knowing. And I was actually like silent crying for a lot of the session. So for the first part where I was like going through a past life, I was silent crying, it was the pretty kind of crying, not dramatic, but there was definitely like a lot of release happening. I had to go to the bathroom in between as well, which is quite normal during these sessions, because you have to physically let go. Yeah, and I had just had kind of a slightly tough time calming my mind and having my general thinking mind be quiet and sit in the corner, because at that point, and I still am quite an overthinker, I think a lot, I get a lot of ideas, and I always have some issues with calming my mind and kind of grounding. But at that point, I still didn't really have all the tools that I needed to differentiate between, I guess, thoughts that are coming from kind of a clear, more helpful space, and then thoughts that are, repetitive or on loop or that don't really serve my highest good. And then during the higher self part, that one again was also a little bit tricky to let those answers come out. It was quite slow and stilted. It was a bit hard to listen to the recording back because the pauses were so long. And I doubted the results. I was like, did I make that up? But in the end, with, a little bit of time, I realized, those stories that you kind of see or experience in that space are just like so out of nowhere. Like I wouldn't be able to imagine and make up the complexity of the stories, or even, the emotions that you actually physically feel. So in that way, I know that I didn't make it up, because it just wouldn't be fast enough to make up a story like that. But after the session, I felt extremely peaceful. I felt taken care of. I felt a sense of being protected and watched over, and of there being a higher guidance that is watching over me. and it really cleared up the difference between that higher guidance and that kind of higher intel and just my normal thinking thoughts that I could then choose to respond to or to just let pass through. And after my first quantum healing hypnosis session, I needed about a year to properly integrate all the information. So had the session, but then I kept on getting like puzzle pieces and like understanding parts of it better over the months afterwards in meditation, then later on in like a group regression where some of the themes came up again and I got kind of more parts of the picture. And then I think even in my second quantum healing session, I got like another piece of the story. So it really did take a while for me to understand all the messages that I got and the bigger context. And so yeah, even though we may go into it and think like, oh, that was cool, you know, and you kind of get out and you feel floaty and peaceful, but you may not really get the whole picture. It can take a while. So I'd say like roughly like a year after my first session, I kind of had a big enough picture to feel ready to, you know, have a second one or to delve into just like the next themes that were relevant for me. So that's my mini story of my first session and how I felt before and after. And if you feel drawn to working with me, either in Berlin in person or to have a session online, which works super well as well, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to offer my time and energy to your journey.